أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة، حي على الصلاة، حي على الفلاح، حي على الفلاح. الله أكبر، الله أكبر، لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن سيدنا وحبيبنا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه الكريم بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم: قال الملأ الذين استكبروا من قومه للذين استضعفوا لمن آمن منهم أتعلمون أن صالحا مرسل من ربه قالوا إنا بما أرسل به مؤمنون قال الذين استكبروا إنا بالذي آمنتم به كافرون. صدق الله العظيم. فقال النبي الكريم صلى الله تعالى عليه وسلم: أربع من كنا فيه كان منافقا خالصا، ومن كانت فيه خصلة منهن كانت فيه خصلة من النفاق حتى يدعها: إذا اؤتمن خان، وإذا حدث كذب، وإذا عاهد غدر، وإذا خاصم فجر، أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. أما بعد. There is a quote from a philosopher of old that says that one of the greatest signs of intelligence of an individual is to take a thought into one's mind without truly and fully accepting it. Somebody makes a claim to you or a statement, and before they have provided evidence or even after they have, you take this thought in and you try to understand the premise behind it. You try to see from a different point of view. When we allow ourselves to step out of this idea of binary right and wrong, that there's only one right and there's only one wrong, it allows us to be able to move towards a more holistic path, which is to say that for humans throughout history, we have allowed ourselves to fall into either this person is right or this person is wrong, rather than trying to see nuance within it and perhaps allow our minds to be changed. When someone has gained our trust and they make a claim, whether it be small, perhaps even when it be large, we're more likely to accept it. But sometimes then when someone has proven to be a liar, we'll very quickly reject it. But what about when someone who's very trustworthy makes a claim that's very grand and also defies what we've believed for most of our lives? Well, at that point, the natural answer is you may accept their premise, you may hear what they have to say, and then you would ask for evidence. If the person truly and sincerely, if they were to actually provide evidence that fully, clearly, and without doubt supported their argument, you would have to accept their premise then. This is the basic understanding that we as human beings take. However, unfortunately, in our time today, we live in what's often referred to as a post-truth society. That there may not be an objective truth to every answer, that there may be some kind of way to spin something. And what you see that through that is that we have really two types of people in the world. That there are those who can admit to being wrong about something. Somebody gives some evidence, somebody makes a claim, then follows it up with evidence, makes it a very clear, logical pathway. They can admit, you know what, I was wrong. I was wrong and you're right. But on the other side, there are those then who cannot accept it no matter what you bring them. No matter what you say to them, no matter how you say it, no matter the evidences that you bring, they will not accept it. The Quran is littered with examples of these types of people. That prophets ﷺ were sent to their people and they would offer them not only clear logical advice, but they would then also give them evidence. They would also show them signs from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Musa alayhi salam with his hand that turned a bright white, but also that he could take his staff and throw it and become a large serpent, which in that time in Misr, in Egypt, was considered to be a very, very auspicious thing, a very, very wondrous item, which is the snake. But one particular story, it really kind of stands out when it comes to the presentation of evidence and this idea of making an argument and then presenting evidence. And that is the story of Salih alayhi salam. The story of Salih alayhi salam. His people, Thamud, who he was sent to. And Salih alayhi salam, his story is that he was sent to his people. إِلَىٰ ثَمُودَ أَخَاهُمْ صَالِحًا. Salih alayhi salam was sent to the people of Thamud, who were his own people. قَالَ يَا قَوْمِ اعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مَا لَكُم مِّنْ إِلَٰهٍ غَيْرُهُ. And he made a very simple claim. O my people, worship Allah alone. Don't worship these idols. Don't get bothered. Don't get stuck in all these things that you think are correct. I'm giving you a very simple truth. قَدْ جَاءَتْكُمْ بَيِّنَةٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. Evidences have come to you from your Lord. Evidences have come to you from your Lord. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way the Quran is written, it's not meant for you to read it like a storybook and it's, oh, this happened, then this plot device happened, then that plot device happened. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condenses stories for us to take the lesson from them. And with Salih alayhi salam, he begins by preaching and he tries to teach and he tries to get people to accept this message. And there's a very small group that of course does. Typically, as with most prophets, it's the weakest amongst them. Because for them, they don't have preconceived notions. They don't really have some idea of, well, I've been doing this and it's gotten me here, so why don't I keep doing this? No, they are an open book. When he brings them evidence, they're willing to listen. But the people of Salih alayhi salam, who were the higher people, who were the richer folk, if you will, they were much more obstinate. They were much more stubborn. And they were not willing to listen to Salih alayhi salam. And then they made a statement to him. They said, look, you're a prophet. You want us to believe in you. You want us to accept what you're telling us. Well, we want some evidence. We want you to give us some evidence. And they thought of the most ridiculous thing that they could think of. They said, you see that mountain? Bring a camel that's pregnant from behind that mountain. Pray to your God and ask for a camel that's pregnant to come out and then deliver its animal, the child it's pregnant with right in front of us. So Salih alayhi salam, he asked his people, he said, listen, I will do what you're asking me. I will make this dua to Allah, but will you believe this when I give it to you? When I make this dua, if Allah sends this to you, will you believe? Of course, yeah, of course. Yeah, why would we not? I mean, come on, a camel? You're talking about matter seemingly coming into existence out of nowhere. It defies the laws of physics. It defies everything any person knows. And so Salih alayhi salam says, okay, if you agree, you'll believe, I'll make this dua. And he makes the dua. And just like that, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim allows for a camel that is pregnant to emerge from behind this mountain. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands, and all his command is be, and it is. And this camel is now coming out that's large, very large and pregnant. And when it comes out from behind the mountain, it delivers the child that it was pregnant with. And the people of Salih alayhi salam, many of them at this moment say, well, okay, I can't deny what I'm seeing now. There is no debating this anymore. This is truth. This is very clearly truth. I have to accept this. But even still, in the face of the most obvious evidence that a single person could have, you ask for something that does not make any logical sense to happen, and immediately after asking for exactly what you asked for comes to be. It broke their brains. It broke their logic centers. And instead of saying, you know what, this is truth, I accept this, they just kind of said, okay, whatever you say we'll kind of do. And Salih alayhi salam made it very clear. He said, look, this animal needs to be left alone. And when it comes to grazing, to having water, then it needs to have its own day. Nobody should be going at the same time this animal is going. And so the people agreed. Even though many of them still did not believe, they said, well, we can't really deny what's factually in front of us. And so they agreed. And there was a period of time where the people would go one day and be able to get their water, to get their needs as it related to the water, and then the camel would go other days with its child. And it was an alternation. Until eventually, people began to take this very camel for granted. Those who disbelieved said, what are we doing? Why are we giving up our time to a camel? Why are we giving up an entire day of being able to get water to a camel? Forgetting the very simple, basic fact that this was a camel that came to existence miraculously. And they started to kind of get with one another and talk about, hey, we need to take care of this problem. We need to get rid of this camel. And they did. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this. فَعَقَرُوهَا. They strung it up. They cut its tendons. They slaughtered this camel, which was a miracle from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And at this point in time, Salih alayhi salam, when he heard about it, he became extremely sorrow. That he wasn't sitting there saying, man, what's wrong with these people? No, he became upset. He became sorrowful. Because all his objective was, all his goal was to preach the truth to the people and get them to believe in this message. And when he made his claim, he backed it up with clear and obvious evidence. Evidence that if you look at other stories in the Quran of other prophets, alayhimussalam, this seems to be by far the clearest and most obvious evidence that there is. That a camel comes to be from nothing, exactly how they asked for, and from behind a mountain out of nowhere. And even still, they could not believe. They could not accept this fact. In spite of evidence. In spite of something that was very, very clear. From a person who was not a liar but was trustworthy in his society even before he began to preach to them. And the Quran doesn't give us this story to look at them and say, man, how foolish were these people? They're so dumb. I'm not that dumb. The Quran comes to remind us that you are human. Just like them. And you are liable to fall into the same logical inconsistencies, to fall into the same traps as these people, if you don't allow the guidance that you follow to be divine guidance. If your objective, if your life pattern is just kind of doing whatever people do, going with the flow, you'll never be able to break out of that when evidence comes to you. That, oh, my father used to do this. Oh, people back in my country, this is how they did things. And what ends up happening is that when we do not follow this divine guidance, and we allow our lives to be dictated instead by the patterns and habits of people who came before, when we reject the evidence that is the sunnah, the evidence that is the verses of the Quran that give us very clear instructions, when we reject this, we allow ourselves to fall in the same pattern as people who had very clear evidence presented to them, and still we're not able to accept it. The people who we know to have this problem, in particular the issue amongst our ummah in its early days, the people who had this issue were the hypocrites. And the Prophet ﷺ spoke about the hypocrites, and he said that there are 4 things that are signs of a hypocrite. And if anybody has these within themselves, then they have a piece of hypocrisy within themselves. That this person is, when they're trusted, they break that trust. Someone tells them something and they tell somebody else, hey, don't tell anybody else this, but such and such and such. And then they go to someone else and say, hey, I didn't tell you this, but such and such and such. Breaking people's trust, whether they know it or not, is irrelevant. وَإِذَا حَدَّثَ كَذَبَ. When they speak, when they talk, they lie. I think right now, we see this so often in media, especially what's happening to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. There are people who constantly go on the airwaves, who go on TV and television and say this and this and this happened, when absolutely none of it did. Constantly, these are the type of people we see. The Prophet ﷺ said, وَإِذَا عَاهَدَ غَدَرَ. This person, when they take an oath, when they take a covenant, when they actually say, I swear I'm going to do something, they fall short of it. No, don't worry, I'll do this. You don't have to worry about it. I swear, I promise, I this, I that. But they fall short. And then this. وَإِذَا خَاصَمَ فَجَرَ. When they argue, when they debate with people, when they get into these arguments with others, they take things way too far. They go way too far. And when you think about this, I think this really, brothers and sisters, is important for us to think about. Because ask yourself, how many times has it been where perhaps you're having an argument with a loved one or a debate with somebody, and they tell you something that's true and then they back it up with evidence. But rather than accepting that I was wrong, rather than saying, you know what, you're right, I made a mistake, I was not correct in this, we go into a place where now we just start insulting someone. Now we just start trying to tear them down. We just start trying to say, no, you don't even know what you're talking about. You're this and you're that. This happens constantly. This happens constantly. Somebody gets into an argument, gets into a debate, the other person proves their point, and rather than accepting, taking accountability, you know what, I was wrong, we instead fall into the pattern of people like Thamud, people like Ad, that we say, no, you're this and you're that. We cannot accept the truth when it comes to us. And this is what the Quran is trying to teach us. One of the many lessons we can take from this is that truth is something that exists. There may be some nuance, there may be some ways to kind of understand it differently, but truth does exist. And when you are given evidence, when you are given facts, it is incumbent upon you to accept them and follow it. Otherwise, you fall into the level of those who perished. You fall into the pattern and the habits of those who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala inevitably punished. And none of us wants to be in that place. Reflect for your own self. Have there been times in my life where I was told I was wrong, I was proven to be wrong, and then even still I kept arguing? I kept saying, no, this, no, that. Instead of taking accountability, accepting that I was wrong, and allowing everybody to just move forward. Brothers and sisters, please scoot up. Scoot up, brothers. There's a lot of space. Front row, please scoot up to this row as well. Brothers in the back, any space you see in front of you, scoot up. This lesson, brothers and sisters, it doesn't come easy because so much of it comes from pride. So much of it comes from, well, this is what I believe, and if I believe this, then it has to be right. But this is not the case. And we need to allow ourselves the humility to be able to recognize we can be wrong. We can say something wrong. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open our hearts to the truth. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from arrogance and allow us to be people who are righteous in all states. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لكم ولسائر المسلمين فأستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم أما بعد. Like I said, brothers and sisters, unfortunately we live in a post-truth society. That you can be right even when you're wrong. You can believe something, and even though it goes against every natural law, even though it goes against the very simple logic that one knows even as a child, you can be right. But we as believers do not accept this premise. In whatever field, in whatever area that statement is made, we do not accept this premise. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us something objective to judge by, which is the Quran, and the other side of that revelation, which is the sunnah of His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. These are the things that we utilize to make our decisions, to make our judgments, to understand what is right and wrong in the world. So if somebody comes and says, such and such is a habit of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, therefore you should act in this way, it is inappropriate to say, no, why don't you worry about yourself and follow this sunnah yourself? It's not appropriate. If somebody comes with something that's truthful, somebody comes and says, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to do this, and he used to say that this was not good, you should avoid this. Then at that point in time, there is no debating. There is no arguing, oh, but I think. Because guess what? Nobody cares what you think when it comes to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It's just a fact. It's just a fact. We need to allow ourselves to recognize that we have an objective set of measures to judge by. That we can always look to the Quran and the Sunnah for the answers that we need in our lives, no matter what they are. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we recognize and believe in His perfection, we also recognize that He would not leave things to His servants, to His slaves, without giving them answers as well. This goes against His majesty. This goes against His perfection. I leave you with three things, brothers and sisters. When you are faced with those people who will not accept the objective truth, in spite of overwhelming evidence, in spite of the reality of the situation, know that no matter how much you tell them, no matter how much you offer them in the way of evidence, no matter what you say to them, they will not accept. You can tell when people are sincere. You can tell when people are having a conversation or a debate with a sincere desire to be told otherwise. But there are very clear signs when somebody does not want that. And they just want to keep arguing no matter what. Don't waste your energy on those people. Allow yourself to be able to recognize there are some people that you cannot help. And the only thing that you can do in the face of such things is better yourself by avoiding those people. Number two, for ourselves, always question your own ability to accept the truth. Always question, am I somebody who, when faced with a truth that I don't like, that I can accept it? A truth that goes against what I have believed for most of my life, that I can accept it. Think about not just in terms of somebody coming to you off the street, but think about your spouse. That your spouse says something to you that you disagree with, and they give you evidence behind it on why you should do this or should not do this. And rather than allowing yourself to have the humility to listen and say, I hear your premise, I need to reflect on this, we say, no, you're dumb. No, you're foolish. No, you're this. This is a sign of hypocrisy. This is amongst the signs of hypocrisy. And this goes for any person. No matter who you are, we will never always be right. The words that come out of our mouth are not divinely guided as they were for the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I'm reminded of an anecdote that a scholar told his student after a decade of study with him, that his student was leaving him and he said, give me some advice so that I can go out and teach and be good in my role as a leader. And he thought for a moment, and his teacher said to him, never think you're Allah and never think you're the messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this young man is crushed because he spent so long with his teacher learning the basic intricacies of this deen. And he says, how could you think I would ever imagine to say such things? He said, you misunderstand me. I'm not saying that you're going to say that. But he said, rather that when you speak, your words will not be divinely guided and correct like the messengers were. So do not think you are him. And things will happen that you cannot control because you are not Allah who says be and it is. Recognize your own shortcomings. Recognize your own lack of ability in certain situations. And so, brothers and sisters, ask yourself, when I'm faced with these circumstances, somebody comes to me, even if they're a child, maybe they're right. Maybe I should listen. Maybe I should reflect, because if I am too arrogant to do so, if I say, no, what do you know? And I do not listen at the very least. And again, the sign of intelligence is that you take an idea without accepting it. You take it in and listen and understand and reflect without accepting it. Then this, brothers and sisters, puts us squarely in the path of what's right. It allows us to be people who are listeners rather than so arrogant that we cannot hear what anyone else has to say. And lastly, don't allow yourself to be like the people of Salih alayhi salam. When you have any kind of disagreement, whether it's a parent, a spouse, a child, and it becomes clear you're wrong, remember that you will not always be right. And you can take a lesson. And if you allow yourself to be arrogant enough to say, no, what do you know? You're incorrect. I will never accept what you have to say. This is a sign of hypocrisy. This is something the Prophet ﷺ warned us against. When the truth comes to you, accept it. Accept it. And be accountable. That, you know what? I was wrong. Because this accountability is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala calls us to in the Quran constantly. And if we hold ourselves accountable now, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not hold us accountable on the Day of Judgment. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to open all of our hearts. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from arrogance. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us people whose hearts are rightly guided. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما صليت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد اللهم بارك على محمد وعلى ال محمد كما باركت على ابراهيم وعلى ال ابراهيم انك حميد مجيد ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا يا مولانا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم عباد الله إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون اذكروا الله العظيم يذكركم واشكروا يزدكم واستغفروا يغفر لكم واتقوا يجعل لكم من أمركم مخرجا وقيموا الصلاة.
الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Fill in the gaps, fill in the sides. Before you start new rows, fill in the rows on the sides. Start all new rows from the middle where I am. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.